Hi everyone, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. It has been so long, but it is so nice to see you guys again. Or you guys see me again, because I'm talking to a camera. If you guys are wondering why I've been gone for so long, I took a little break from trading because the market was doing the opposite of what I thought it would do. And I don't know why the market is at an all-time high, because there's really nothing to get excited about, and the volume has been low, which makes trading not that fun. So while I'm not going to talk about the stock market today, I'm going to be talking about the headlines recently on New York's Democratic primaries, where Zohran Mamdani, a political newcomer, defeated Andrew Cuomo, the former governor of New York. Now, before I begin this video, I want to preface this by saying that politics is not my thing. So before you make your political assumptions about me, whether it's being left-leaning or right-leaning, Democratic or Republican, please remind yourself that I am not trying to push any political agenda. I'm not trying to be polarizing whatsoever or attack or defend any political party. That is absolutely not my thing. I'm approaching this strictly from an economic and historical lens. I care about what works in practice, not just what sounds good in theory, so please keep that in mind. So today I want to talk about the economics behind Mr. Mamdani's platform. So Mamdani is part of the Democratic Socialists of America, and he wants New York, and ideally all of America, to go down a socialist path. And given how much talk there is about socialism these days, it's worth digging into what that actually means. Because as my favorite economist, Thomas Sowell, likes to say, there are no solutions, only trade-offs. Okay, so let's define socialism. So socialism, in its simplest form, is when the government controls or owns key parts of the economy, like housing, healthcare, education, and sometimes even grocery stores. The goal is usually to reduce inequality and make things more affordable for everyone. And it's easy to promise free things: cheap rent, low grocery prices, higher wages, free childcare, baby baskets for everyone. All of that sounds wonderful. But the question isn't whether these things are desirable, because of course they are. The real question is, does it result in a better society? Well, the good news is that we don't have to guess how socialism works. History has run this experiment many times before. Take, for example, North Korea, one of the poorest and most repressive regimes with widespread poverty, food shortages, and minimal economic freedom. There's Venezuela. After implementing socialist policies in the early 2000s, the government faced hyperinflation, severe shortages, and mass exodus. Then we have Cuba. So Cuba has long suffered from economic stagnation, rationing, and limited access to basic goods.
You a communist? Huh? How do you like it? They tell you all the time what to do, what to think, what to feel. Do you want to be like a cheap? Like all those other people, man?
I don't have to listen to this bullshit.
And then we have the Soviet Union, which was notorious for chronic shortages and inefficiencies. These countries have had a long history with socialism and are notorious with low living standards. So let's dive into just a few of Mamdani's campaign promises and the reality that they'll create. So let's talk about rent control. So rent control isn't new. New York has had it for decades. Mamdani has promised to expand rent control by further bringing down the rent and building more rent-controlled apartments. But here's the problem. When you force prices below market levels, you create shortages. We can look at a couple examples right here in California. San Francisco and Los Angeles have been expanding their rent control laws every decade since the 1980s, and with each successive decade, there are less and less apartments available to rent, and when you finally do find an apartment to rent, you're looking at a minimum of $2,700 for a one-bedroom. Yet in cities like Austin, Texas, Phoenix, Arizona, Atlanta, Georgia, Dallas, Texas, Las Vegas, Nevada, and Chicago, Illinois, where there's no rent control, apartments can be as much as 55% cheaper. It might seem counterintuitive that cities with rent controls often end up with a higher cost of living than places without them, but once you look at the incentives rent control creates, it starts to make sense. Costs go up and quality of life goes down. For one thing, people lucky enough to get rent-controlled apartment, even if they hardly use it, hold onto it for dear life. Ed Koch was the mayor of New York for 12 years. During that entire time, he kept his rent-controlled apartment even though he was living in the mayor's mansion. Can you blame him though? Like, why would you give up a bargain? Not only do people hold on to their rent-controlled apartment, but they also go and get more of them. Congressman Charles Ringel had 4 rent-controlled apartments in New York. One was used as an office. Actress Mia Farrow paid $2,500 a month for an 11-bedroom residence looking over Central Park. Cyndi Lauper paid less than $1,000 for her rent-controlled unit. When tenants hang on to rent-controlled apartments, it means fewer homes are available for everyone else. That's why you see those huge waiting lists in places like New York, sometimes stretching on for years. There's as many as 1 million units in New York locked up this way, taken off the open market. The more housing tied up in rent control, the tighter the supply becomes, and that drives prices way up for the apartments that are left. That's why it always feels like there's a housing shortage in these rent-controlled cities. So ironically, policies meant to keep housing affordable actually ends up making it more expensive for everyone else. As for the rent-controlled properties themselves, well, landlords of rent-controlled units are less inclined to maintain or repair their properties. Why would they? With so much demand and waiting lists years long, they simply don't need to update the property or make it pretty. It'll get rented despite its dilapidated state because it's so cheap. That's why the US, England, and France consistently show that rent-controlled housing deteriorates more than market rate housing. If you don't believe me, just look at what happens in reverse. So, for example, in Argentina, rent-controlled was repealed in 2020. Since then, the housing supply went up and prices went down. Just like that. No more housing shortage. Okay, so let's talk about his other proposal, government-run grocery stores. So Mamdani thinks groceries are too expensive because of greedy store owners. His solution is city-owned stores that keep prices low and don't aim for profit. Sounds nice until you remember how supply and demand works. Farmers, truckers, warehouse workers, everyone in the supply chain needs to cover their costs and earn profit. If government stores keep prices artificially low, producers can't make money. So they produce less or simply go out of business. There's less supply, shelves go empty. That's why the Soviet Union had bread lines, not because people were starving from high prices, but because prices were too low for anyone to profit from producing more bread. Just like with rent controls, low prices also encourage people to hoard at the grocery store. For example, if apples are dirt cheap at 25 cents each, why not buy 10 instead of 5? Even if half end up rotting in your fridge. The people who arrive early to the supermarket might be the lucky few who get to hoard all of the decent apples. But if you're one of the unlucky ones that arrives late, then there might be no apples left, or just the ripened, nasty, soggy ones. And that's how black markets emerge. With only crappy apples left, you might instead turn to the underground or black market where you can get more decent apples for a pretty penny, which means paying more than you otherwise would in a free market economy because you have to compensate the underground dealer for their work and risks. And that is why government-run grocery stores translate to empty shelves and higher costs. Okay, so let's talk about the proposal for $30 minimum wage in New York City. So at first glance, it sounds great. Who wouldn't want workers to earn more money and have a better standard of living? But when you look beyond the surface, the economics get a lot trickier. Businesses can't just print money. They have to balance the books and stay open. So take a fast food restaurant, for example. So if the owner suddenly has to pay workers $30 an hour, labor costs skyrocket. Those costs have to be covered somehow, either by raising prices, cutting staff, investing in machines to replace workers, or in some cases, shutting down the doors entirely. This is why economists often say the real minimum wage is zero, because if a business can't afford to pay the mandated wage, it might not exist at all. And no job means no paycheck. So imagine you run a burger joint in the city. So to comply with the $30 minimum wage, your costs shoot up and suddenly your profit margin, the reason that you're in business in the first place, starts disappearing. So you try raising burger prices, but here's the problem. Basic Economics 101 tells us that when prices go up, demand goes down. Fewer people buy your burgers, and with fewer customers and shrinking revenue, you can't afford to keep as many employees. So some get laid off. And it's not just fast food. Retail shops, dry cleaners, small restaurants, local services all face the same math. The higher the mandated wage, the greater risk that businesses will either reduce their workforce or vanish completely. And that's not just a theory. We've seen it happen in cities that rapidly hiked minimum wages, and small businesses, which often operate on razor-thin margins, were hit the hardest. So while the idea of a $30 minimum wage sounds compassionate, the unintended consequence could be fewer jobs, higher prices, and even more economic hardship, especially for the very people that it's meant to help. Now, some of you might be comparing Mamdani's proposed policies to those of places like Switzerland and Sweden. Switzerland and Sweden have high tax rates to fund their social welfare programs, but they are very much a capitalist economy, just with high tax rates and generous social welfare programs. Mamdani's proposed policies go further because we have government meddling in private transactions between two entities, whether it be a grocery store and the customer, a tenant and their landlord, or a business and their employees. Government intervention distorts the market, creates artificial shortages, and ends up costing people more. It takes away the incentive people have to create, invest their time and money into new innovation and product, and deprives people of choices. With that being said, capitalism and free markets are not perfect. But when you think about the alternative economic systems, whether it be feudalism, socialism, or whatever, the only system that has consistently lifted billions out of poverty and improved health and sparked innovation that was unimaginable a century ago is free market capitalism. Thomas Sowell said that socialism in general has a record of failure so blatant that only an intellectual could ignore or evade it. We should celebrate the market system, not vilify it, because ultimately it's the best engine we have for turning dreams into reality. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let's keep the conversation going below in the comments, and I will talk to you guys very soon. Have a wonderful rest of your week. Bye.